A very sound British lawyer has gone through Rishi Sunak's Brexit deal, and in this video we're going to explain the fundamental problems with this new arrangement. Welcome back to the channel, another video that you're not really going to get from the mainstream media. A proper explanation of the fundamental flaws of the new so-called Brexit deal that Rishi Sunak and Ursula von der Leyen have agreed to sign. Now, I did say on the day that, of course, on a very objective level, we don't want to just be sitting here and moan about everything in the world. And it definitely has fixed or attempted to fix some of the aspects of trade between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. But it comes at a cost. And we did say that if something is satisfactory to when it comes to people like the Ramonas and Ursula von der Leyen, then you're going to have to question it a little bit. So, Stephen Barrett, a lawyer who we actually talked about him quite recently, he went on TV and talked about the EU laws, the thousands of EU laws that we have in this country that we've been trying to repeal and get rid of. He actually explained very simply that it's easy to do, but of course the government are taking their time. He did actually decided to go through the whole documentation, and he's written about it, and I'm going to talk to you guys about what's actually in this piece that he has now written. It's quite interesting. Some of the flaws, I've already talked to you guys about it when I read the details, but it's quite interesting to kind of see what a lawyer would actually think of it. So, he says, if the first paragraph says, "My first impression is that the whole thing is not a deal at all. The version of the text published by the government is a document with no legal effect that is possible to enforce. It's a wish list of vague commitments." And this is the key point. Now, of course, I didn't notice this part because I'm not a lawyer. I've noticed all the other flaws of the agreement, which we talked about, and we're going to do it again today. But this is quite interesting to kind of see from a lawyer's perspective that, well, it seems to be that it's not really that enforceable, which means it's all about the balance of powers. If it's not enforceable, surely some aspects of it will be more powerful from one side. And considering that the European Union have the European Court of Justice on their side, I'm guessing if there's any dispute, the EU side will win any dispute over the United Kingdom or Brexit Britain. So it continues by saying, firstly, EU laws will continue to apply in Northern Ireland, which we talked about, which is a huge problem. This fear amounts to the opposite of sovereignty or independence from EU laws. It is what the EU has demanded since the referendum, saying, sure, leave after you pay us, and then do as we say. It effectively says that that's basically the new arrangement. Now we appear to be falling into line. And this is what Boris Johnson was talking about. And because yesterday he made a series of speeches about this, and we're going to talk about it later on the day on this channel, what Boris said. And we're not really defending Boris Johnson here because he was the same man who signed the original deal. But the point of it is that, and it was imperfect, but we know that we've, as Stephen Barrett said, we are now finally falling into line, the EU line, at this point, between Boris Johnson's deal and now, while it was imperfect, there were still complications. We still had some sort of power to renegotiate, but following the completion of this negotiation, we are finally on the EU side. So Stephen Barrett continues by saying that what this agreement means is that the EU will effectively run Northern Ireland, and the UK can have a voice on the joint committee that will do the actual work of running Northern Ireland, but only if the rest of the UK also does as it is told and does not diverge from EU law. So we already talked about this flaw, which is the fundamental issue of it. It says that the rest of the UK could have their own laws. The EU laws will mostly apply to Northern Ireland, and we're not going to do any checks, it's fine. As long as the UK doesn't really change the standards on goods and all this, the processes. Otherwise, everything will change. And Northern Ireland will have to become even more of an EU member. So, which is quite fascinating considering they claim to be paranoid about UK standards going lower. But in reality, everything that could happen potentially, regardless if it's a Labour government or a Tory government, because of our culture, if we change our standards or processes, we'll be higher than the EU. So we should be the one who should be more paranoid about the lack of level playing field. But the EU are saying, well, as long as you don't really change anything about the rest of the UK, it's fine. We can all play nice. But that means we're kind of in a prison right now. So now Stephen Barrett continues by saying that you may have heard of the storm and break, which is essentially allows Northern Ireland to say no to a specific EU law. Remember, the EU makes hundreds every year. It is a complete fantasy. Exposed to his eternal credit very quickly by an accountant called Peter Donaghy as completely unworkable. There is almost no circumstances in which its high bar is met, something which the EU itself actually admits. They do say that mechanism could be triggered in the most exceptional circumstances as the last resort. But again, the whole storm and break thing has been sold to us as this is a safeguard, it's perfect, the Northern Ireland could use it as a veto, but no, clearly it's just there as a gimmick because you can't use it until it's like very special circumstances, last resort, which again, who defines it? Who is there to assess the line? The European Court of Justice. Brilliant. So, Stephen continues by saying that the European Court of Justice is still there too. Northern Ireland is still under EU rule, but no one need notice this if the whole of the UK agrees to their regulations. Time after time, that seems to be the real purpose of the EU's negotiations with the UK. It has given itself mechanisms such as the trusted trader scheme it controls. This is about the two lanes, the twin lanes, that if you're on the trusted traders list, then you can freely trade. If not, then you're in a mess. This is to punish the UK if we dare to self-govern. VAT laws on a variety of products, for example, must match the EU. No competition allowed. So again, they allowed us to set our own VAT and state aid rules. But as long as we're on the same level as the EU. So we can't really make it too different. We can't set a different rate because that will be competition and they don't want it. The whole thing is a gimmick. The whole thing is a mess. But if you go out there and complain about it, they'll just label you, oh, you're just a nutter. You're just angry about everything. Just calm down. Everything's happy now. Just agree with it and done. But that's not the reality. It's not going to work. And you're going to see in a few years that it's not going to work. It's going to affect a lot of small businesses who can't get on the trusted traders list to be able to trade with Northern Ireland and the rest of the mess with EU laws. And we can't even actually compete. The rest of the UK, we're also essentially tied to EU. Because if we change anything about our regulations here, in England, Wales, or Scotland, then the whole thing changes. So that's the reality. And this video is very important. That's why I thought I'd kind of do the analysis so you guys could share it with your friends and neighbors and family and everybody else, or any Ramonas that you know, to know the truth about this imperfect document. Let me know what you think. I'm Mahyar, Tousi, and we are the media.